a continuation.
All right.
I bet
Yeah.
everybody's gonna miss that. Hey, and we're back. Yeah, there were some technical difficulties or some confusion, however you wanna see it. So where were we? What were
Well,
we?
we're gonna continue. Let's continue with your last learning journey to learn composition.
My journey to learning composition. Well, as you guys, the same as you guys, well, but in different way. In a different way, I took lessons, piano lessons, when I was like 7 or 8. I began, and then up until 9, and kind of stopped and didn't really like. I used the lessons. I learned basic piano, but I used the lessons and wrote little notes here and there, and those were like my first compositions, baby step compositions, but kind of left music for a while. And then after that, I turned into a teenager and started to listen to a lot of rock music, and that kind of got me started with the guitar. And I got a guitar when I was 12 or 13. At first, it was a Spanish guitar, then it was an electric guitar, like that one down there. I think I have it since I was like 15 or so, for example. So I've been playing electric for a while, and then it was in bands. I was in bands, and but I kind of like with the piano. I could always see that there was a purpose to my playing. It wasn't playing for playing sake. It was like playing for creating, in a sense. And we had Sane last week or so. No, a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
and he said something very peculiar to me, like how he wasn't really into special effects or stump boxes or processing or stuff like that. I was the different. I was the other way around. Like I didn't care that much at the time for technique, even though I was taking lessons in classical guitar. Um, but I care more for the electronic sounds, the weird sounds I could get out of the guitar. I think that's where, when I say that my background in electronic music, that I think of music in some ways as electronic music, as electronic processing, that it goes back to that period of stump boxes, of processing the sound of the guitar through guitar pedals. And then I was in some bands and stuff like that, trying to create my own music. And I entered the university. I was in and out of like formal training in guitar, learning. I read music, but not at that high level. And it wasn't until university, my second or third year, I started like shunting, wanting to be a doctor or something. I changed to the humanities department, where they had a music department. No, humanities faculty, where they had a music department, and there I began my formal training. So I will say that I was the latest to begin my formal training out of the three of us. And there were, well, you could tell what happened, like theory classes, harmony classes, and between those, it was a composition class. But
So
like,
is it group composition class or is it one on
yes,
one?
it was the first one I have was a group composition class, and that one, they gave us pretty standard exercises. Um, you might
Like
say, okay, like,
counterpoint or
no,
arranging or
counterpoint was another class, and I was influenced by counterpoint during my first years. I remember going to that professor, like, okay, so how's a group composition lesson? You might say, uh, the teacher, Carlos Cabrera, it was Carlos Cabrera at that time. He will show us a piece. We wouldn't analyze it, but we will listen to it. We will talk about an aspect, like let's say the harmony, or the counterpoint or the form, and he will or like a specific technique like 12 tone rows, stuff like that, and he will tell us to bring an exercise the following week, and we as a group will analyze it together, analyze each other music and critique it together. Like he will sit at the piano and play it, and we will um, say what we thought about each other music. I wouldn't say that I developed much of my own voice there, but the interest was already sparked, let's say. It has already begun. It had already begun during the previous years, during my guitar playing years, guitar focus, let's say. I was still taking classical guitar technique and stuff like that. But then I went into this, I discovered the second Viennese school. After I began like in a more impressionistic Debussy type of way, with those types of harmonies, more whole tone scales, more pentatonic and stuff like that. But then it was like the second Viennese school, especially Weber, kind of caught my eye, and I began writing in this expressionist style. But still, I couldn't develop my voice. That's when I began taking one-on-one classes with another teacher, with Nora Ponte, and she was always pushing me. Even though, how were those lessons? We were two students actually. They were not one-on-one lessons. It was two-on-one lessons actually, because
Hmm.
well, uh, because
How does how does 2-on-1 lessons work? Were you
well,
paired like specifically with somebody who was working on something similar, or
no, we were very different composers. I don't know if she's composing right now, like formally. I don't think
so
so,
did
but
they take
it was,
turns like looking at each other's
yes.
music? Yeah.
Yeah, well, like the first part, it would be like analyzing music, analyzing
Hmm.
contemporary music, like Ligeti. I remember analyzing a lot of Ligeti, analyzing Bartok, and like that technical aspect. And the second part, it was more or less like one showed his composition and the other one showed his composition. And first, we will see in each other what our critique. We will see like we will critique each other as students. Then the teacher will step in and give her 2 cents about everything. And it was like she wanted us to develop our voice, but I will say that she was more of a technique based composer or teacher. Like she will give a lot of attention to the counterpoint, to the lines, to the instrumentation, to like the physicality of the instruments, to the practicality of the instrumentation and stuff like that. And then I kind of retook electronic music, but more from a what we know as electronic music perspective, right? Like that's when I wrote my electronic music pieces. That's when I began writing. Uh, uh, there was something, and I think I said this to you the other day, Shantin, like about the harmonies. My harmonies, it seemed like I couldn't get away from that sound world of expressionism, always using imposed fourth over fourth over fourth, yielding these semitones or tone based harmonies, stuff like that. It kind of sounded always um, pretty dense, and the gestures, they were always based on the harmony. Uh, One thing that I must thank that teacher for is that she wanted to bring out my own voice, like, and she always showed me like um when I compose things that she will say, "Oh, this is more original than the other stuff that you are writing because you always gravitate towards these sonorities of being expressionistic, of this 12 tone stuff." And like, okay, it was new for me, you might say, because it wasn't Like um, the atmosphere in where I was studying was pretty classical based, and people were writing more tonal stuff. So I was driven into that, but there was so much more ahead, and she wanted me to get ahead on that, and that's when we started studying more contemporary pieces, and I started kind of taking bits and pieces from here and from there, and everywhere, and kind of like uh yeah I kind of was developing a voice more of my own. And during those classes, those two-on-one classes, actually, is like I noticed that you guys could identify those bachelor years as your most important ones when developing technique. And I think that that's why Felder didn't focus that much on technique. He was like, it was a given for him that even if we were halfway there, we will develop it on our own. So I will say that those were the most crucial years for my formation. I also wrote theater music, and consciously wrote in binary forms and in more baroque style forms and romantic style for languages and stuff like that. That I consciously copied composer from the past, but I didn't want that. I saw that as like a composition for hire. So I began doing like separating both. Like artistic composition was my own compositions, was my own voice trying to get out there, trying to create something that was more unique that I could only create. So even composing in other people's styles, even composing in in those exercises, doing uh, although counterpoint, you get a sense of balance and stuff like that in melodic lines, specifically speaking. But composing in other composer styles kind of gave me a sense of what was artistic composition and what was
Mhm.
a composition for hire, being an artisan, for example. So, and there I could develop more of my voice, and that's when I was kind of entering into Buffalo with that string quartet, infamous reading of the
Mhm.
string quartet, that kind of like I I will consider, I wouldn't consider like my opus one, but it was kind of one of my first pieces that was really my own. And from there
Yeah.
on, like I developed more of my style there, but I was much more secure. I only needed a bit more language, a bit more technique,
Mhm.
so to speak, that I got in Buffalo for certain. Like a lot of a lot from our colleagues, a lot from the seminar, a lot from like I first studied with Stadelman and then studied with Felder. Stadelman was um, he was, I would say that he was technique based in a way, like because he will give you ideas. Okay, this reminds me of this composer. You could go this way. You could go this way. You could go this way with this. He will give you ideas. That's how
Mhm.
he will teach music. Now he wasn't that much about aesthetics or anything like that, but I think that it was pretty useful for the state I was in. And when I got into studying the one-on-one with Felder, I will say that yeah, even though I wanted to speak more about the technical aspects of composition than he wanted to, I will. That's why I say that he was already given for him it was a given that you already had the technique in you, or if you didn't have it yet, you were maturing into it. He was more interested in getting that voice out through other means,
Mhm.
that you were conscious, that you could put it into
Mhm.
words, that you could explain it to another person. My music is about this. I believe this in music. I want to express this through my music, and so on and so on. So that was pretty much my journey. It's like,
Yeah. I think
uh,
it's really interesting that you were able to like so easily kind of decipher through learning all these styles, like which ones were more original and which ones were more composition for hire, the term. Because I don't see a lot of
yeah,
young composers being able to do.
like literally they paid me for that job. It's like uh, yeah, well, if you want to, I kind of learned unconsciously that if you want to gain money as a composer, you had to write in other styles that weren't your own. If you wanted to
Mhm.
write more artistically, yeah, nah, you will probably not make
No?
much money. And I kind of learned that there in that uh, works for
Wow.
hire, theater, music, etc., etc. Because I was writing in other consciously in other composer styles, using counterpoint, using the theory to write music,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of composers
Yeah.
do that.
I
So
mean, a lot of young like a lot of my students are very interested in doing that. I think but they don't really discern the difference. They like that music and they want to write that. And I would say like the ones who want to write, and what they think is contemporary. Um,
what do they
Most of the
think is
time,
contemporary?
well, I think they think contemporary is just like arbitrary sounds and notes and stuff. Like I feel like
Oh yeah,
it's like
yeah.
it's an excuse, like for not having to have a refined palette or make any sense. Um, like I have some students, like I have quite a few students that will like I have actually most of my like most of my especially students who are very new to composition, they fall in two camps. Is that they're either like to do lines and then they just kind of arbitrarily just throw things together and not like um not any kind of intentional way, because there are a
Mhm.
lot of composers who um do that really, like Ives, for example, an intentional way.
Yes.
This is not, it was just kind of like they wanted everyone to play and they just wrote lines. So I have like they'll do that, or they'll like make chords they like on the piano
Hmm.
and then they'll just arbitrarily assign notes, but then the lines don't make sense. And if I like say something like the line is really not very musical and your dissonances aren't resolving in the right voices,
Hmm.
a lot of times they'll be like, oh, well, it's not a conventional chord. It's new music. I'm like, but I get
But
it and I'm all about that.
you're
But
already
like,
within a framework. You're working
yeah,
within a
but like,
vocabulary.
yes, I'm like, our ears are designed to hear this way. And if you don't want to do that, you actually have to work harder because you actually have to teach the audience how to listen. Um,
Within the
and if
same
you,
piece, like
yeah,
within a
like
minute.
if you had
You
an
have to
idea,
establish
like
the, yeah.
you don't want to resolve dissonances, fine, but then you have to kind of figure out a pattern, a different kind of pattern to make and consistently not resolve the dissonances. Um, and yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of times I find that writing in contemporary music is a cop out because they just don't understand the music. And if I might like when you first hear it and you don't understand it, it can just sound like a bunch of arbitrary noise.
But
It
that's
can just, and I think that's what they listen to 10 seconds of it and that's it, and then that's what they assume it is, and then they assume, oh, I can write in this style and I don't have to make conscious decisions about anything. Um,
that's why that teacher in Italy, what she said to me, like it's always relevant, like music, and it's relevant to contemporary music as it was to Gregorian chant. Like what is composition about? It's about keeping that balance. It's about unity and contrast. In the end, it's about
Mhm.
that logic and that tension between the two. Like you create a tension and you create a release too. That's also present, but in
Well,
the end,
yeah,
it's
and
about unity and contrast, and you have to have some logic to that. If you don't have a
a
logic to
lot of the
that,
years, like I'm a listener. Besides, I'm a listener of contemporary music, and I'm a classically trained musician. As weird as my music might sound, like my ears are very classically trained, and I'm very, very open to new ideas. But I still have that I have that context and that training, and if somebody wants to explore a new idea that I haven't heard, they have to teach it to me, within their piece, or they have to showcase it in a way that I'd understand. And that's being, I probably have a wider variety of music than many. I mean, all of us probably we probably would have an easier time if we went to a random new music concert. We'd probably have an easier time understanding what was presented in front of us than many people would.
even other classically trained musicians that are not used to listening
Yeah.
to new music, that see new music at a bunch of scribble or a bunch of rubbish, as Shantin will describe, something that was of a period like from the 70s of 12 tone music and was experimental, and people were searching for this or for that, but are going back to tonality as a response, and that's kind of like you cannot go
Yeah.
back. Once
Well, and
you've reached this, especially like once you listen to somebody like Lachenmann, it's like how do you go back from that into tonality,
I
into
mean,
cadences?
people do. I mean, there are many
Well,
composers who have, but besides the point, people do. But yeah, I understand the yeah, because I mean, I found the discovery of all that kind of stuff just so exciting, in every way. Um, yeah, I don't. It's but I also find that it's hard for my students to find like it's hard, like, so I do have some students that want to write in like classical styles, and then some students who like they're kind of in between, like they kind of like to write in classical styles, but they're kind of want to discover new things, but they don't they have a hard time taking the same level of care and thought in presenting something in a more contemporary style as they would if they're trying to write something that sounds like Mozart. Because I think they think, oh, this is random.
yes, and we just had the May the 4th, whatever weekend, right? And there were
Uh-huh.
Star Wars concerts all around the country, all around the world, stuff like that. And many people consider, like, no disrespect to John Williams, but uh, John Williams, the composers, as the pinnacle of composition. And when you study the
Mm-hmm.
art,
Mm-hmm.
like it's like okay, no, sorry, but no. It's like I cannot accept that because we have gone so far from that. He's writing in a style that what he's done was done 100 years ago, 150 years ago was already been done. Like,
Yeah, I mean, in his defense, it's from what I understand, is he was hired to write music like that, and that in the scores, the film scores that he worked for, they had the director selected classical repertoire that they
mhm.
liked for the movie, and asked him to write a similar piece because they wanted original music.
Yeah, well,
So
but at the same time, you have
yeah.
somebody like Stanley Kubrick that used Ligeti, that used Bartok in The
Oh, for
Shining, for
sure.
example, and
But
he used
they,
them really effectively. And
but
like,
different different directors hiring different, teams,
Well,
having different
yeah,
intentions.
and I'm not gonna comment anymore on that, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's that feeling like, okay, I can write in another people's style, and you have the ability, you are trained for that in theory and stuff like that, in learning harmony, learning counterpoint, learning orchestration, learning all of that, learning to arrange effectively. But I always felt, even before I got the formal training, even when I was only doing guitar stuff with bands and stuff like that, that if I didn't do my own thing, if I didn't contribute my own music, my own voice, why was I doing it? It was pointless to me.
Yeah.
It's
I
like,
think that's a really impressive thinking for somebody who's young. Um,
I didn't see the point. Like, and I was
I
really
agree with
open.
you, but I don't think I don't think I got to that till much later, to that thinking. I think I was when I was very young, I was just happy to receive attention and praise. That's kind of what I wanted, because I didn't know many young composers really.
Mhm.
Um, so it was like something different I did, and so yeah, it was more about I wanted to be good at it, and I wanted people to tell me I was good at it. Probably until maybe 18,
Mhm.
17, 18. Like that was when I maybe kind of got to that thinking. I do think it's a much more mature thinking to be like, well,
Well, that's
composition is
all.
a lot of effort, and I want to. I don't want to just write something to write it or for just the attention. I want to write something that's going to be my
I
voice.
guess, yeah, the aesthetic
Yeah.
is it goes that way. At least for me, it has always kind of been that, but it kind of depended on what I knew,
Yeah.
because like as I told you, like when expressionism, when 12 tone techniques was new to me, it was like, oh, this is, then it was spectralism, and I tried to copy spectralism in some of my
Mm-hmm.
pieces and stuff like that. But then it got to a point that, okay, we are, you got all of this repertoire, you got all of these materials, what it is, what's one's got to say about it, and that's where you're
So
gonna get to
I
in this composition lesson,
yeah,
I believe.
I
Like,
have a question, just like both of you. Like, how much knowledge do you think one should know before like attempting to
oh,
write a piece or experiment with composition? Because I know that's something like that. Like I in my music school, me and the some of the like the founder of the pre-college conservatory I work for, we have very different views on it. Like I've taught children that were like 9 or 10, and they were starting to learn theory, but really basic theory. Like they were starting, they were had taken a couple years of an instrument, and they were starting to learn like scales and intervals. And I they would learn even one small thing. They would learn like one scale, or they'd learn one interval. Like I remember with a class, like we learned about the perfect fifth, and
mm-hmm.
then they all wrote pieces using just perfect fifths, and exploring perfect fifths. And it was like, they're not gonna, be pieces that are gonna win like Morton Gold ASCAP prizes, obviously, but they were so creative. They got them excited about music, excited about learning more theory, and they were all so different, and they came up with ideas that I would have probably never thought of with that prompt, and I quite enjoyed it, and I felt like they got a lot out of it, but like other people think that um, people should know a whole lot more than just a perfect fit before even trying to explore composition at all.
Shantin, do you wanna chime in on this?
I mean, for education, composition is a way that help students apply their knowledge or help them explore some kind of rules or knowledge that we believe that we have already written on our textbooks. Um, my I I mean I'm growing up from a culture that most students and teachers are more afraid of mistakes, and we learn a lot of rules. When you talk about perfect fifth, I thought about the parallel
Yes.
fifth
Okay. Me
from
too.
our
Mhm.
harmony lessons,
Oh my god.
and
Mhm.
The
and
trauma that you spoke about is there.
and
But you get a lot of freedom when you only have a perfect fifth.
and
Then parallel fifths become okay.
and and
Like
act
Gregorian chant.
and actually it's fine. It's
Or
fine
I
to have
should say
parallel
organic.
fifth, and 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 I was very inspired when I believe it was in high schools. The the theory teacher said, you know what? Actually, people summarized their observation to write music theory. I was inspired back then. Oh yeah, actually, people discover. I mean, people summarize or generalize some kind of rules for us to follow, which means we can somehow create our own rules. I was very happy, and then very soon we were assigned homework to write the harmonies for figure bass. So okay, yeah. There are still rules to follow. Um, but I think it's very instructive if students have chances to write their own music based on some well defined rules or guideline, such as for example, you can uh, the students can write pieces based on perfect fifth,
Mhm.
um, augmented chords, or you can ask them to write a piece um, with an ascending chromatic scales, but you can change the color. You can change the use. Let's say if you play it on the piano, you can make some of the pitches overlap. Let's say, or the use of the pedal or something like that. Then I mean, well written guideline or or some restrictions can help us be be more creative.
That's the
Mhm.
Stravinsky. That reminds me of Stravinsky. He was somewhere say probably in his, I don't know, his composition lessons in 6 chapters, something like that. That's what his book is called. Like he needed, at least he thought that every composer should set upon a set of strict rules and work within those parameters. And if he doesn't know how to do that, then it will fall off. It wouldn't find logic and internal logic or stuff like that. I have mixed feelings with this because, for on the one hand, I will quote or misquote Debussy on this. Like, um, he used to say, "Works of art create rules. Rules do not create works of art." On the one hand, and also we have the example of Yanis Xenakis, right? Xenakis, when he went, no, you don't know about when he went to study with Messiaen. Let me put him on the banners. Xenakis, and the best teacher, in my opinion, uh, in spite of what many people say about Boulanger. My respects to her, but Messiaen. He produced so many original composers in contrast with just generic composers, like Xenakis plus Messiaen. When Xenakis went to study composition with Messiaen, he started. There was this story that he was trying to get his harmony right with the perfect fifths and stuff like that, and Messiaen just told him to stop. That he had already a special training. Xenakis was an architect, as we all know, right? He had a special training in mathematics, one that no other composer he knew at least had. So he should use that special training in mathematics to compose the works he did in the end, which are works that nobody else I've seen that could replicate, or at least in the sound
Mhm.
world, in the mathematics involved, in the texture, in the timbres, in the organization. Like Xenakis was another thing. Like, let's just say he's a composer that I should study more. So we have that as a precedent. Xenakis, for example, is a good example on that. Chiarino will be another example. He never received formal training, yet he was very, very creative, and he expanded the vocabulary of composers. On the other hand, if you are creating something, you are working as an artist and that you discover something that has already been done 50 years ago, then that's kind of like uh, my guy, you think you are doing something really experimental, really avant-garde, but it was done like a long, long, long time ago. So don't get your ego that high. So you must also learn the repertoire, what has been done, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, but I think
I have
I don't think you have to necessarily learn it before. I think you can
no,
continue composing while you're learning it. Yeah, I
I
can't.
think
I don't. Yeah,
I will agree with that statement. Definitely 100% with that statement. Like
like I don't
begin
think they should.
composing from the start. Begin composing from the start, from the outset.
Any of those
But
composers should be satisfied with my perfect fifth and a couple major scales and be like, great, I know all the theory I need to go to have a whole career as a composer. Um, it wasn't that, but it was enough to get them to write pieces that were interesting, pieces that were fun to listen to, and pieces that hopefully encourage them to want to create more and also learn more and learn more about music and different different intervals and chords and styles and textures. um yeah.
uh, yeah, that also makes me think how we used to talk about proportions and how we used to talk about form. But what if your intention as an artist is to have a disproportionate piece? What if your intention is to have an exaggerated piece? What if your intention is to have this piece that is overloaded with materials?
Yeah.
For example, like
Well,
that is
we talked about what's his why can't I think of his name? He was at June and Buffalo many times. Oh, it will come to me. Who had the overload?
Fernie
No,
Howe?
no, not Fernie Howe. What was his name? He had like the really. He had Rafael Sendo.
Oh, okay.
Like his music, I think is kind of bad.
I think he was
Intentionally so.
more in a few decades ago than he is now, Rafael Shendo. Shunting, you
Yeah.
used to be a fan of his, weren't you? Shunting? Hello? Not there. It's fine. But yeah, Rafael Shendo, it was an overload sometimes, yeah, and that was the aesthetic of the
I think it was definitely purposely so.
yes.
I don't know. It wasn't an aesthetic that I enjoyed listening to, if I'm perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't. I enjoyed it more than other things, at June. It wasn't like the worst thing I heard at June the Buffalo.
Uh, and
For
I
sure.
that way now that we talk about that, I must correct my statement from before, like that. Uh, Showing an economy of materials is what um, shows that you're a mature composer. No, intentionality of what you want to do and how it translates
Yeah,
into the score and into the music. That's what shows you,
intentionality. Yeah,
yeah,
I think
a mature
I, I
composer.
think I can't think of an example of a piece that's purposely disproportionate off the top of my head. But
Well,
when I hear that idea,
Stockhausen,
I mean
like
Feldman
some of
too, I
my,
guess, right?
no, yes, it was
Um,
an extreme, like
and I think that stuff is. I mean, I'm very fascinated by that idea. I think maybe when you want to do something like that, maybe extreme is the way you have to do it to get that point across. Then, because
and
if it's just a
you
little bit
admire
too long,
you admire John Cage a lot, right?
yeah, yep.
And
And
a lot, it
Cage
seems
and
like a lot
Feldman
of
kind of have
people,
some overlapping aesthetics, even
yeah,
though their music sound has sonically different.
no, but yeah, a lot of people had problems with Cage's music, and his philosophy and his aesthetics and stuff like that,
Mhm.
especially European based in a way. But at the same time, it was the French. It was Boulez, for example, some of the first people to get Cage, like, and really be champions of his music.
Mhm.
So there's that dichotomy there also. So intentionality, I will say, intentionality. Cage's intentionality came through in the end and won,
Yeah.
I will
And I
say.
think like
And you
if you
cannot
wanted
ignore him.
to,
You cannot ignore him.
if your intention is something that most audience members aren't familiar with or uncomfortable with, and I think you almost have to be even more intentional about it and more extreme about it, or else it sounds like a mistake. Um,
Yes,
and yeah,
like intentionality, I will say it's the mark of the it's the voice in the end. Like
for
if you don't
sure.
have intentionality, even though and this is paradoxical in a way because Cage's intentionality was chance based, was
Mhm.
arbitrarily based, but it really came through that it was chance based, and his
Yeah,
parameters were all parameters in a way, but in a sense that created a sense of parameters that you could expect what to hear and what not to hear.
and I
Oh,
remember like I think intentionality can become a big part of composition lessons, especially for composers who are really trying to develop their voice.
mhm.
I remember when I studied with Lee Halla, um, and he was always super kind and encouraging to me, but I always felt like while I was studying with him that he really didn't understand my voice because he spent the whole time just asking like what seemed at the time like very basic questions about my music. He didn't like just state big long reactions. He would be asking questions the whole time.
Mhm.
And I was 20 at the time when I studied with him, and at the time I just thought, wow, he just really doesn't understand my music. He's just always asking me questions. And then when a couple years later I kind of realized, wait, like he wasn't answering the questions, asking the questions for him. He was asking the questions for me so that I could have a little bit more awareness in the choices I was making and be able to talk about them and have intention behind it. And I think that can be an important aspect, and it
And
was for me, especially at that level.
it's very important for performers, for the performers that are performing your music, to know the intentionality. I became aware of this after I don't know, one of my piano pieces, one of the ones that I first consider one of the first ones where my boss voice came out. Like she started asking me questions about, okay, what is this piece about? Okay, what do you want to say here? And she kind of pushed me
Mhm.
to think more in terms of explaining it to a performer, for example. Okay,
Mhm.
so I want this to sound like this because of this. uh, right? So that shows that you are in control of what you are writing. And in
It
the
was
end, yes.
yeah. I'm just thinking like I think of that like I don't know if David Felder had any of you guys do this, but like he used to have me write a series of program like different program notes for the same piece.
Oh,
Like he would have me write
that's
like
weird.
one for
That's
performers,
pretty
one
cool.
for composers, one for audience members, one for people who might not know anything about contemporary music because he wanted me to have all these different like a version that I might use in like a composition seminar with all like you know like composers and it was yeah so that was like another way like to express to learn about how to talk to the music too that he did with me. He made me write all these different versions.
I used to hate writing program notes. Now well, with time I have pushed myself to put it into words because as I was trying to tell you guys, like explaining what your music sounds like to somebody that's never listened to even remotely contemporary music or new music after modernist
Mhm.
music, Bela Bartok, something like that is really, really, really hard. And you have to practice like using different adjectives, describing these different waves of motion, how, directionality, tension, release, etc., etc. Uh, like that was a very useful exercise. Sean
Mhm.
Ting, you're back.
I'm back. Yeah.
You're back. What do you have to say about intentionality? We're talking about intentionality, and I kind of ask about Rafael Shendo. You used to be into him for a while, right? He used to use a lot of materials, but that was part of his aesthetic of his
Mhm.
intentionality as a composer, right? It
Mhm.
wasn't an economy of materials aesthetic.
Sometimes I find it hard to answer this type of question because
Mm-hmm.
occasionally I hear things that I like and then I just use it without consider without considering so-called intentionality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
however, I believe if the sound or pitches, harmonies, or whatever techniques that is suitable for a project, you will at the end find a reason for that little things. For example, if you include a C sharp for a piece that's you think there shouldn't be a C sharp at all. Let's say let's
Mm-hmm.
maybe you hear the C sharp in that place, and then you don't see a reason for that, at
Okay.
least for that moment. But
But
eventually, I believe,
still,
but
you're talking about,
eventually,
yeah.
eventually, you will see a reason for it. If it should be there.
But in the end, you're talking that the intention of the composer was to break his own rule. There was a rule that he
Well,
shouldn't include the C sharp or something in that particular piece.
well, I
And
think
the
he's
intention,
talking a lot about intuition. I don't know if
intuition,
intuition
okay.
is necessarily opposite of intentionality.
I would say sometimes
You're right. That
sometimes
dichotomy,
if
it
we
can be a dichotomy sometimes. Yeah.
sometimes
Sometimes.
we may wanna set some kind of rules or boundaries for our projects. Let's say maybe you want to write a series, and then maybe you want to use a matrix for that, and then you want to remain cohesive. You want to maintain a good sense of unity, great pitch organization, but perhaps you suddenly hear something that you don't know the reason for it. However, we as a composer, we may want to have a better control of our work. We may want to find a reason for it. We want to see whether it fits. Then we need to. I mean, for me, I would wait. I will wait. I will write it down and then name my file as Trash King, and then I will try to write more and more, and then I will see whether that particular C sharp can stand the test of time. If can still hear it, and then if I can still hear it, and I then will think about intentionality. Whether I truly intend to have it, can I use it again? If I use it again, what's the reasons? I think about this kind of questions. Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I was occasionally questioned by teachers as well about this. Yeah. Why you want that? I remember I had a piece performed in Finland, and then I suddenly I suddenly wrote a G major chord just to try it there.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And
And
then
sometimes you are following your ear. You're listening to the music, and for
Yeah,
some
but
reason, you say a seventh chord goes there. I got that from the performers on the guitar
sometimes
quartet
our
piece.
intuition knows a lot. Like our intuition knows more sometimes than our consciousness. So like I feel like sometimes your intuition can have intentionality. It's just hard to put words to it.
but you know what? I suddenly recall one episode in my life. Uh,
Yes.
I I wrote a piano piece at the end of my study at Vienna Conservatory, and then the pianist suddenly played a B flat major chord, which was not in the score. However, it sounded pretty nice, and then sometimes something unintentional works pretty well. You don't know, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I
There are many stories like that. I've heard many stories like that where
and
performers screw up, and the composers say, "Wait, what you did sound better than what
I'm
I wrote, so I'm
some,
gonna incorporate that."
somehow I
That's
wanna
not uncommon. Not uncommon at all.
bring up one thing that I mean, when we talk about composition lesson, what what is the most important part of our process is the performance itself. And at
Yes.
UB, we were kind of spoiled because the school uh, brought in prestigious groups or emerging ensembles to
Yeah.
perform or to read our pieces. But back in my more formative years in Hong Kong or New England Conservatory, I had to contact musicians and ask if they would try my pieces.
Hmm.
Which means actually, I mean, there are pros and cons for this kind of situation. The good things is you could build a working relationships with other fellow musicians, um, and you will have a lot of chances to collaborate with them if they like new music or if they like your music. Um, However, while the drawback is sometimes students performers are not really interested in our work. they play our music because of like oh we are schoolmates or we are friends, so we play your piece.
Hmm.
And some of them are not very accomplished. I mean, in terms of new music, and then they don't have any. Um, I mean, they don't have a lot of insights in terms of interpretation. They may play your they may try they usually try their best to play all the pitches accurately, but they won't give you a lot of input. The worst is sometimes they don't get your music early enough, or they don't have time to practice at all. Then the
That's especially true in bachelors, because in bachelors they are almost never trained in the new music repertoire. They are always training more
Well,
classically
I would
speaking.
say I would say the exceptions to that are probably the only two I can think of are percussion studios
Yes,
and
of course.
saxophone studios because that's their rep.
back in the Academy for Performing Arts, um, we had to write like two pieces in a semester. A lot of times we gave pieces to the performers very late, like maybe a week before the actual concert, and most of us were in inexperienced, and the performance was sometimes really bad. And somehow this may traumatize me. For example, I was afraid of like low register for the flute. I was very scared of this.
Hmm.
I I was more confident about writing for the strings, even if I don't play any string instrument, because I work with string players the most.
Mm-hmm.
I I'm very concerned whenever I need to write for the bassoon, because my experience with bassoon is um was not very satisfying.
Hmm.
I mean, I mean, yeah,
Hmm.
So that
getting.
goes into the practical aspect of working with performers and what they are used to, and like, well, if
I
they
mean,
are more used to, like, if you write music like Mozart, for example, or Tchaikovsky, uh, they are gonna be more open because they are already familiar with the language. As one composer teacher that I had, that I never took composition with him, although I wish I had, now thinking upon it. Like, uh he said, like, every musician knows, or at least intuitively knows, that that idea of music as being a universal language is a lot of BS, and it's just like something that you tell people, like for fairy in a fairy tale manner, or like in a fantasy world manner. But music is a bunch of languages. It's a
I
bunch
mean,
of different languages, and if you are giving somebody a score that is a new language for them, then they are gonna show more resistance toward it. And if you experience that as a composer, then well, uh, your ego, your self-esteem might suffer a bit, because you think you're doing something wrong, when it's more of a communication problem. And that's something that a lot of um, teachers don't talk about. That's why I mentioned him and mentioned that he
Hmm.
was a composer. He taught me ear training and sight singing. I took ear training and sight singing with him, but like no other composer teacher that I've got really has talked to me in that way. Let's say so. just something to consider,
Mm.
right? Like the performers and how they got their own language or languages. Like, what if
I
you
mean,
give?
I feel like I had conversations like that with David Felder, but I think
Okay.
it was also because maybe my language is so different even for a group that specializes in contemporary music.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of the groups he brought in struggled with my music. But he definitely we definitely talked quite a lot about like who should the performer be.
Yeah, I think that Pang and
And
Shunting and I still use pentagrams.
I mean, what I wanted to say is, a lot of times when we talk about composition lessons, it's about like the interaction with the teachers. We talk about like the scores, manuscript, or maybe what kind of projects would be assigned for us in the semester, something like that. Um, however, there in the lesson we usually don't get to hear the sound of our score. We hear it in our head, but not physically, and it is very different from other music majors. If you study the piano and then you play the piano and then the professor will comment on your performance. But in composition, you won't write your work in front of your teacher, and then your teacher won't hold your hand and or maybe and or he won't erase anything from you with his eraser. You you don't hear and most of the time you don't hear the actual music performed by the performers because you are only going to look for them after you finish the piece. A lot of times it works like this. That's why teaching or taking composition lesson can be pretty tough.
Yes, definitely, and that's why instrumentation and the experience of the teacher definitely matter. And it kind of reminds me of something that we as a group heard in the seminar. I think that Felder mentioned it many times, like how the score or the sheet of music is a fiction, is a work of fiction. And you mentioned this earlier, Shanting, like the important thing is in the end, what is it? It's the performance itself. It's not the score that we write. It's not that it's a beautiful score. It's not that uh, you can show it to other people. Look, I wrote very sophisticated music. What does it matter if it doesn't get played? What does it matter if there's no sound that comes out of it, right? Or if what you wrote is very pretty but in the end it's not effective, meaning that your intention or that for example you write very loud lines, melodic lines for the lower end of the flute that never work, for example. And I'm getting more into instrumentation a bit, but it has to do with a lot of this, like the score, the sheet of music is a is more of a fiction. It's a way of communication, like let's say.
Mhm.
In the end, is how to communicate effectively. I would say too, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
And well, I think we've been here
Yeah, I think
a
we've done
long,
two.
long,
We got
long
a two for
time.
one.
Yeah, two for one
Two for
tonight.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess any last word from you guys?
Uh,
Effective effective communication. I
I
meant.
mean, I think the thing about composition too, at least for me, like there are what you think about in composition gets more complex, I think, the more you go through it. So like composition really doesn't get any easier. I mean, you get more you get better technique and you get more sure of like your voice and what you want to accomplish, but then it also brings up kind of more things to think about. So that is that's something that can be challenging. It's really challenging to begin with, and I don't think it's something that it changes and it becomes different as you study. But I don't think it ever becomes like, no, this is easy. because I've been doing this for, I don't know, more than
That
20 years at this point.
that goes back
30
to
years.
the search of the artist. What
Mhm.
stimulates you as an artist, as a composer, to write the same thing over and over and over? I don't think so. Well,
Mhm.
at least for some type of composer, for some type of artist, what stimulates a certain type of artist is what's new, what's innovative for his own language,
Whereas, like,
for his own
as,
language.
as a horn player, for example, there are many things that are really hard on the instrument, and I will notice, certain pieces that were challenging for me or certain techniques that were challenged for me all of a sudden aren't challenging. You don't get that kind of
It's
quite
kind
that
of
kind of progression
dopamine.
with
Yeah.
composition.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
And it's
yeah.
also about dopamine and stuff like that. Like satisfaction and things you've never thought possible that now are possible. All of that is included. Anyhow,
Yeah.
I don't have anything else to say for today. Chantin, do you have anything else?
Yeah.
Megan, do you have anything else?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
I'm good already.
Yes.
It's time
Uh,
to forget about all the trauma in composition lessons. At least for tonight.
we got
Yeah.
it out. Yeah, we got it
Yeah.
out. Yeah, at least for 2024 is enough. Enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's fine. Well, this is where the stream ends. So we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.